I'm David Fode, editor of Public Sector Catering magazine, and thank you for joining us for the second in our series, The Future of Your Food Service webinars. Today we're going to be taking a look at hospital catering, and we're doing this in association with the Hospital Caterers Association, the HCA. Hospitals, as I'm sure you've been well aware, been much in the news over the last 3 months due to the COVID-19 lockdown, and caterers have been playing their part in the tremendous NHS effort that's taken place since. The format for the next hour is pretty straightforward. We'll play an interview with the chair of the HCA, Craig Smith, that we recorded on Monday. And this will be followed by a live Q&A session when Craig and his 4 co-panelists will be available to answer your questions. And perhaps it might be a good opportunity right now to meet his co-panelists. And I've asked them to introduce themselves. First, we've got Brian Robb.
Morning, I'm Brian Robb. I'm an area facilities manager within NHS Lothian. I look after 5 major hospitals, and I've got about 23 GP practices and medical centres. And on top of that, I'm the honorary vice chair of the Hospital Care Association.
Thank you, Brian. Andy Kemp.
Hello, I'm Andy Kemp. I'm Group Sales and Marketing Director of Bidfood and also sit as Vice Chair of Arena and a couple of industry bodies. Thank you.
Okay, and Gail Walker.
Hi, I'm Gail Walker. I'm Managing Director of Open Door PR and we're food service marketing specialists. I worked recently on the board of the government's hospital food review with Phil and Craig.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Phil Shelley.
Hi, good morning everyone. Facilities Manager at Somerset NHSFT. Currently seconded by NHSI to support the team nationally. Past Chair of the HCA and current Chair of the Food Review. Great to be with you this morning.
Okay, right. If you want to get in touch during the webinar, you've got 2 ways of doing it, and it might be actually worth me mentioning even before I do that, that other than the 4 panelists, Craig and me, everyone else will be muted. But yes, if you want to put a question to the panelists, then we're asking you to use the Q&A function, making sure you include your name and your company. And please try and keep this 2 questions rather than comments or statements. That way we can make the most of the time available to us. You can post a question at any time. There's no need to wait for the end of the video interview. And it's worth mentioning that there is another way you can stay in touch, and that is to use the chat function. And this is more for sort of comments and reaction that you might want to do. You're more than welcome to add those there. If you do, choose the function to all panelists and attendees, and then everyone can see what you're saying. Unfortunately, if you post a question to chat, we won't be able to answer it. We are recording the whole webinar, and a recording of it will be available on the Public Sector Catering website on Monday, so no need to take any notes. I guess the other thing worth mentioning is that if we don't have time to get round to your question or all the questions that are being asked, we do intend to follow up, and we will make sure that there are answers to these, and we'll be posting those online too. Just before we actually start the interview with Craig, I better introduce him just in case there's anyone here who doesn't know him. For more than 40 years, he's had experience working in the NHS, starting off as an assistant catering manager at Lister Hospital in 1979. Became District Catering Advisor for North Hertfordshire Health Authority before joining the fledgling healthcare service provider Mediclean as its first catering manager at the Bristol Royal Infirmary and associated other hospitals. Craig is currently Head of Corporate Affairs at ISS and became National Chair of the Hospital Caterers Association in April 2019. We'll now run the video. Well, hello Craig, I hope you're keeping well.
I'm fine, thank you, and you?
Yeah, excellent. And we'll kick off with the first question then. As we continue the process of moving out of lockdown, what do you see happening in hospital catering over the next few months?
Okay. One of the first things I want to say from the outset, though, is when everybody's talking about coming out of lockdown, an awful lot of the hospital caterers have been right at the forefront, and when they come out of lockdown, it isn't really too much different for them because they've been in this crisis right from the very start. But what I hope that we'll see is a careful and a measured return to some kind of normality. What that normality looks like just yet, I'm not quite sure. But what we have found is that because of the COVID outbreak, an awful lot of our other services that we provide for other health issues have been curtailed. Cancer, orthopedics, normal surgeries have all been cancelled. So what we'll be seeing is, I hope, a reopening of those wards in a measured way so that we can get back to what we consider to be correct healthcare.
Okay.
On the retail side, though, we need to be seeing the whole of the retail element in hospitals starting to come back to being some kind of normal. But that's with the rest of the retail in the high street in exactly the same way.
Okay. What about if we take just a slightly longer term view of the service, maybe over the next sort of 6 months to a year? Do you see some of those things that you've just mentioned there starting to develop differently perhaps than they were the way they did before?
I think so. I think that we've got to learn from these experiences very much. We've been in at the outset of this, everybody kept saying it's extraordinary times. Well, we've lived through them now, and we've got to learn the lessons that we were given in there. And I think that there will be some things that will change. I mean, one thing that I can immediately point to is the way that everybody so far has addressed the system of cashless sales. I think that it will be a very good idea if more and more of our retail units move to a cashless society. Everybody else seems to be moving that way. It is a lot safer. It's a lot cleaner. But there are other things that we have to start addressing, and things that we've learned throughout this crisis are things like the sandwich deliveries and so forth that we've had. We had the whole thing about listeria before we had COVID. We kind of just climbed out of that pit that we got into, and we've already seen that a major supplier of sandwiches to the NHS has actually gone into liquidation because of this outbreak. So that's two major suppliers that we've lost, and so we've got to start looking for other answers that are more sustainable, but more importantly, probably safe.
Okay. And just taking now a real long view, do you think the lockdown will have a lasting impact on hospital catering service? And if so, can you give us an idea of maybe in what ways we might see that happen?
It's very much in the crystal ball, that really. But what I hope will come out of it is that we will come out as a lot stronger, not only as a catering service, but as the soft facilities completely across the NHS. What we've been able to do in these last few months is to really demonstrate the importance of what our kind of people are actually delivering into the NHS. It's been recognised by the general public, maybe for the first time. We've always known that we've played an important role, but I hope that will not be lost. Yeah.
Okay. You've hinted at some of the things that maybe the lessons learned, if you like, already. I wonder if you sort of perhaps can give us one or two more examples, and then also sort of address the issue of planning for contingencies such as we've been through, whether the plans that you've had have actually worked out in practice.
Okay, well, to address the contingency planning, the NHS has always been very strong on having contingency plans and everything in place, and from time to time they've always been looked at and brushed down. We've had emergency scenarios where everybody is put through their paces to see whether it works or not. But it does take a proper crisis to actually really put these things into the fire and make sure that they work. And I think, from my point of view, certainly from looking across a number of hospitals across the four nations, it hasn't been found to be wanting. The caterers have been involved right from the outset in terms of the planning, what had to be delivered, how it was delivered, and we actually got on and did it. And I think, if anything, that's come out of that is a proof positive that our teams are really as integral to the NHS as the nurses and the doctors, and that's a very important message to come through. What we've seen in across the various hospitals are just endless stories of people who have gone that extra mile and have shown exactly why people like myself and the hospital caterers, why we work in hospitals. It is an exceptional element of the hospitality industry, and we really can and do make a difference.
Okay, turning maybe now to the supply chain. How have they supported you over the last 3 months or so?
We have to say the supply chain have been absolutely brilliant. The food suppliers like Big Food and even some of the smaller suppliers have been absolutely outstanding in making sure that our supply lines were top priority and they got through. But equally, our equipment supplies and everything, they have been outstanding as well. They've been in touch with us throughout. They've been saying, if anything is broken down or needs repairs, we're going to be standing beside you. We're coming in to make sure that things work. And that it's one of my highlights, I think, of this whole crisis, that our supply chain has really stood right beside us, rock solid. Yeah.
Okay.
Big round of applause for them.
I'm sure they're very grateful for that, those kind words there. Not everything right now is about COVID-19, I hope anyway. And I just wanted to make the point that the HCA's given its support to the Public Sector Catering 100 Groups 20% Less Meat campaign. I wanted to know why you think it's important to look at cutting back on red meat in particular in our diets at this time.
Okay, I think the 20% less campaign is important to us across the whole of the public sector industry for a number of reasons. One is that I think that we have to reflect our demographics. We know that something like 1 in 8 of the population are now either vegetarian or vegan, that 1 in 5 of us actually claim to be flexitarians, and that has seen a general reduction in the amount of meat, predominantly red meat, that we're taking. But we also want to use it as an exercise of actually saying, rather than just cutting the amount of meat that we have in the diet, let's have better quality. Let's reinvest in what abilities that we do have to have better quality and probably more British meat. And those kind of things are really important in the campaign too, I believe.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a little bit earlier about how the suppliers in the supply chain have risen to the demands of the occasion. And I just wondered what your feeling was about the HCA members themselves and how they've carried themselves during these very challenging times that we've had.
I've got nothing but pride for the various people that I'm hearing about. And obviously, as National Chair of the Hospital Caterers Association, I have the ability to dip in and out of all the different regions around the country and to join in with them and understanding, not only sort of spreading the information that is of use to everybody, which is an important part of any association, but equally to join in the stories that are coming out from people. What we found at the beginning of this crisis is that almost without exception, the hospital caterers, the catering management teams were suddenly working almost flat out, and in some cases like 7 days a week to start off with, to ensure that everything was right from the outset. But then we start hearing about specific people who have really sort of taken this that extra mile, and like having to stay away from home because they don't want to bring any infections back from the hospital back into their home, or equally the other way. And that's a real personal sacrifice that a number of people have made. And I've heard these stories up and down the country of people having to do this. And really, it has been one of these things about our people have been on the front line from day one. You know, we're not only preparing the food down in the kitchens, but also the catering teams go up onto the ward levels, and they're the people who are actually serving the patients at ward level. Now, I accept that most of the COVID patients might not have really strong appetites because of the nature of their illness and so forth, but that doesn't diminish the risk that anybody that works on those wards has to live with 24/7. And I think that that's something that everybody can be remarkably proud of.
Craig, you know as well as anyone that the hospital food review that was carried out late last year is something we've all been waiting to hear about. What are your hopes in the review, and do you have any idea when we might see it?
Okay, well, I'm very sad that it got diverted because of the crisis. Phil Shelley and his team had put in an enormous amount of work to get things to a place where it was virtually, well, I believe that the report is finished and it's just on a shelf waiting for ministerial approval prior to its launch. But of course, you know, we have to wait for the government to do that. I hope that when we have the webinar, Phil Shelley will actually be joining us. He may be able to give us more of a steer on this sort of thing. But I would like to see that at least by the end of before the government go for their summer recess, that we'll be able to share it with everybody.
Okay. Now this can't happen, but let's just suppose for a moment that we could magic you into the next cabinet meeting at Downing Street. If you were there, what would be the one thing you'd ask the government to do that would help hospital catering?
Okay, well, as we went through the hospital food review, Phil and the team, we visited as many different types of hospital as we could. And what we did was we deliberately wanted to go and see mental health units, care in the community units, as well as just the straightforward acute units. And if you'd asked me at the outset of the food review, and indeed at the back of the notebook that I had for the review, I wrote down a number of things that I wanted to achieve from the outset. And probably the biggest headline at that time was that I wanted to ensure that the government ring-fence the actual spend that we have on food so that it couldn't be subject to any cost reduction programs and things like that. That really was my biggest hope that we would get out of it. But you know what? As we went around looking at the different places, a lot of people weren't as concerned about the money that they have for their cost per patient day. Obviously, some were very low and some were extremely high, and we need to address that, and I don't dismiss it. But the thing that came through really loud and clear is that if I had one thing to ask the government, it would be, please, can we have some significant investment into our equipment and the infrastructure of our catering departments? Some of the catering departments that we went to see, whilst the catering teams were full of enthusiasm and wanted to do everything possible for their patients, the environment in which they were working on simply hasn't changed for, well, I hate to say it, maybe 30 years or more. And that is desperately sad. We do need some serious investment in these areas.
Okay. I wanted to take a look at plate waste as an issue now, because I know the HCA's spent quite a lot of time focusing on it in recent years, and the reason's clear, is that it is a major contributor to the carbon footprint of catering. So given the need to cut emissions, what should the service be doing to tackle the problem?
I think the issue itself is wider than just plate waste, but obviously plate waste plays a significant part in it. We know that some trusts get rid of their plate waste simply down through the waste disposal unit, so they don't consider it to have any cost, whilst other trusts can be charged up to £175 a tonne is not unreasonable in some areas just to cart this stuff away. So we do need to be looking at it. One of the things that perhaps might come out of the coronavirus issues and everything else is because of the need to be sure that we've got everything right, a lot of people actually reduced their menus quite significantly throughout this process, and the level of choice was severely curtailed. And that was curtailed because of the good reasons that we weren't sure of the getting the supply in, or one reason or another. But we've survived. And do we need, on a, let's say, a 28, 30 bedded ward, do we need to have significant choice right to the last patient each and every time? And I know most people will say, well, yes, of course we do. But if we do that, we have to recognise that there's a huge amount of waste there. So we have to be looking at more innovative things about how we can capture those requests before it actually gets up to the ward level. And I know that the Hospital Caterers Association, we were looking at another waste programme to be issued, and we were looking for that to be issued almost in line with the Hospital Food Review. And of course then we have the Food Standards and Strategy groups, which are working alongside the review group, which will then publish after the main review is done. So there's plenty of things that we can be talking about there. But equally on the other side of reducing waste and our carbon footprint, I think the NHS is probably almost at the forefront of looking at alternative waste than single-use plastics, both in our packaging and in terms of our disposable cutlery and all the other pots and things that we use for our retail units. I think that will actually start to bring down a lot of our carbon footprint too.
Okay. Moving on to another issue now, which the HCA has to sort of face up to. That's outsourcing. I just wondered if you thought that we might see more outsourced meal service provision as a result of the coronavirus.
It's an interesting question, and of course, I have to declare my own interest of working for an outsourced company. But do we, or do I personally foresee an increase in its usage? I'm not entirely sure that we will. It depends. It depends whether or not the government listens to my single request of giving us more investment into the catering departments. A lot of catering departments are having to look very seriously about having a bought-in solution, because the premises that they're working on are no longer fit for purpose, and that's something that needs to be addressed. But I don't want to give anything away from the Hospital Food Review, but these kind of questions about the delivered meal service against conventional has really been tested quite strongly in the review, and I think it's fair to say that opinions changed during the actual process of pulling the review together, and that was clearly based upon actually people looking at the actual service in front of the patient. And it's really the food being put in front of the patient is the important thing here.
Okay. Now the HCA talks, and you all know this better than most, about the power of three. In other words, clinicians, dietitians and caterers working together for the benefit of the patient. I've just wondered whether what's happened over the last few months in care homes in particular might mean now that we need to include social carers into the equation and perhaps make it a power of four. I just wondered then, what do you think could be done to better integrate social care into the health service?
If I could just deal with the Power of Three first. The Power of Three was a campaign which was really directed very much at ward level, and it is very important that everybody works together from the ward door to the patient's bedside, and that's where the Power of Three came from, and it still remains an extremely important element of what we're doing. But you're quite right. The social element, the social care element, is something that has been raised really sort of quite rightly in the media's attention. And we do. I mean, the NACC is a sister association who works very hard to represent the people from the care community. But I know from personal experience, I'm a member of the Oxford branch of the Hospital Caterers Association, and we welcome a number of people to our branch meetings who come from the care community, and there are important lessons which both of us can learn from each other. So I certainly think that the social care sector is an integral part of public sector catering. Yeah.
Okay. Right. That was all the questions that I had, Craig. Much there for our panel and audience to consider now. Thank you.